Hello everyone. I wanted to just take a couple of minutes to review a few things about the structure of your review before you go ahead and submit it. So this can be a really good exercise to do after maybe you've put together your draft. So hopefully most of you are working towards that right now. And I really encourage you to try and produce a draft sooner than later so that you can go over it. Maybe even have someone else look it over for you. So anyways, once you get to that stage where you have your draft, here's a couple things I want you to look over. One of the first things is you're going to want to look at your title, and you're going to want to keep a couple things in mind. So one of the first things is you want to make sure that that title is specific. You are also going to want to make sure that whatever it is the content of your main body paragraphs are, that your title reflects that. So again, I gave a lot of comments on the outline, so hopefully everyone was able to take that information, digest it, and apply it. But really, just try to make sure that your title adequately describes what it is that you're going to be discussing in your paper. And I know that you're not submitting these for a journal, but the reason that a title is so important is you have to remember that that's one of the first things that someone looks at when they're deciding whether or not to read your paper. The title and the words involved are also really important when it comes to search parameters. So all of this stuff is very, very important. So the next thing is your introduction. And remember, when we're talking about body paragraphs, we're talking about these inverted triangles, and you can go back and review the tutorials. But basically, if we think about these inverted triangles, you're going to have information up at the top that's a little bit more broad. And then as you make your way down, this is where I want you to have your objective. So what is the objective of the work? So let's go to the top first, the broad information. I made a lot of comments on the reviews or on the outlines that basically people were trying to cover all of diabetes, or at least give an overview of it and then get into their topic. Don't be afraid to jump right in. Remember that this whole assignment is 7 pages. And so if you think about that, you're going to have to figure out, okay, well, how am I going to divide this up? So you're probably going to have 1 page for your intro, 1 page for your conclusion, and then somewhere in between, you're going to have these 5 pages that make up the body, and you'll figure out how you can kind of evenly distribute that so that the same weight is given to each section. So again, don't be afraid to get started with your topic. Make sure that you have an objective statement at the end. And when you think about your objective statement, I want you to think about, okay, if someone were to read this paper, what would they get out of it? Or why would they want to read this paper? What would be valuable information to them? So those are all things to ask yourself. So then the next thing, we've got these body paragraphs, so body 1, 2, and 3, and I did make a bunch of comments that you should be trying to focus on 3. You know, I hate to be too cookie cutter with these assignments, but when there's grading involved, there's rubrics, there's page limits, we do have to kind of structure them similar for that reason. And I think if you have more than 3, you're going to find you don't get into enough detail within each section. So again, remember that within each body paragraph, again, we've got our little triangles like we saw before with our introduction. But something that's really, really important is you almost want to picture that there's this bigger triangle over all 3 of these body paragraphs. What I mean by that is that perhaps as you make your way from one body paragraph to the next, you're getting more complex. So you're building. You really need to think about the flow of these sections as well. Remember that you're going to have subheadings as well that are going to reflect these. And I want you to make sure that the subheadings really reflect the content. So I want you to think of them as like little mini titles. And so body 1 will have its subheading and so on. And another really good exercise to look at the flow and see how well your subheadings are is replace what I have here. So replace the text of body 1, 2, and 3 with the actual subheadings. And just look to see if they tell a nice story on their own, because that'll make sure the flow is well, but it'll also inform you as to whether or not one is informing the next. So you want to be aware that you don't want just each of these body sections to list information and have no connection from one to the next. Now, Another thing that I usually say to my students is when you're coming back again to the title is that oftentimes that title is going to reflect body paragraph 3. What I mean by that is if you're building on complexity and you're getting to this final piece, then perhaps that's kind of the guts of your paper. Now, it could be body paragraph 2 and 3. I've seen that as well. So, again, these are just suggestions, but, if you try to keep these things in mind, you'll find that it helps you along the way. So those are some tips when you're putting together or revising your body paragraphs. And then the last thing is your conclusion. So again, revisit the rubric. Make sure you're checking all the points because a lot of times certain things get missed or forgotten. So in the rubric, you'll see that one of the things is that the main findings are summarized. Then we've also got that the student identified gaps, and proposed future direction, and then also the implication was addressed. So people often say to me, well, how are those things different from each other? So this section is 5 marks, so you can sit there and say, okay, she's probably going to give 2 marks for summarizing and then a mark for each of the other things. So if you identify gaps, then those gaps need to be addressed, and so that's what happens in future directions. And then the implication is, well, why do we care? What's the point of all of this? So think about that as you're putting this together. So hopefully everyone also took the time to look at the sample that I put up and the comments there, because again, it's really important that you're synthesizing information throughout each of these body sections. So each of them will have 5 marks associated with it. Some of those marks will be about the content, but then the critical analysis and synthesis make up a decent portion of that. And so if you want to get decent marks in those sections, you're going to have to demonstrate that you're not just summarizing. Other things to remember, there's some marks for topic and scope. So again, make sure that here's where we talk about the title and that you're within your area of focus. You've also got those overall organization marks. So again, this is about that flow and these are about your subheadings. So all of that comes in. So you won't be docked in 2 different places for the same thing. What else do we have here? Use of appropriate articles. So I told you there was a minimum of 10. Most people go way over that number. And these have to be primary articles. We are not including review articles here. And so there's also a note about basic science research articles being involved. So not just clinical studies, trying to bring in those basic science pieces as well. And then any sort of grammar or punctuation will be deducted if there's any errors, and same with any format issues as well. There will be deductions. So hopefully this was helpful for you. If you have any questions at all, do not hesitate to contact me. I'm not able to review your paper for you, obviously, but if you have some questions or you're stuck on something, let me know sooner than later so that I can help you out.